new stuff that is happening at SPC. So I will just get started. And oh, it looks like I started at the end of my presentation. Whoops. There we go. Okay. All right, so just a little bit about me and my path to the Storm Prediction Center. I think like a lot of meteorologists, I knew from the time that I was a kid that I wanted to be a meteorologist and, had caught the weather bug pretty early on. And when I was in high school, I knew that I wanted to eventually work for the National Weather Service and specifically the Storm Prediction Center. And so I took a trip down to Oklahoma my senior year of high school, visited the university, actually got to visit SPC for the very first time. And I knew that that's where I wanted to be. So I attended OU and got my degree. And while I was a student at OU, I spent about 2.5 years volunteering at the Norman NWS office. And I also worked as a student research assistant for the Oklahoma Climate Survey, Oklahoma Mesonet. Um, you know, probably there's several of you that are getting ready to graduate, but for those of you that, might be sophomores or juniors, I just want to, or even freshmen, I want to highlight the importance of seeking out these opportunities as a student. Whatever your interest may be in meteorology, it doesn't have to be the weather service, it could be something else, but seek out those opportunities, make yourself known to those entities within the weather community, because it will help you immeasurably by the time you're ready to graduate, whether it's undergrad or graduate school. Once you're looking for jobs, it will help you immensely. So go to your advisors, ask them, for help, let them know what you're interested in. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So I went to my advisor and was like, I see my friends who are graduating having a hard time finding jobs. I don't want to end up that way. I know what I want. So help me. And he put me in touch with the MIC at the Norman office. And he also happened to be the director of the climate survey at the time. And so, that was a really, really helpful connection for me starting out very early in my pursuit of becoming a meteorologist. So once I graduated, I was hired into the Weather Service officially, and I spent 2 years in Billings, Montana, and then about a year and a half in Louisville, Kentucky, before a couple of jobs came open at SPC. I got lucky because they actually at that time had increased their mesoscale assistant and fire weather program and added 2 new forecasters. And so I got hired at the Storm Prediction Center as the outcome of adding those extra forecasters. And this is just an overview of where everyone who works at SPC currently went to school, either as an undergraduate or a graduate degree. So we are scattered across the country, but you notice there's a big Midwestern bias. We're all at SPC because we love severe weather. And so it's not surprising to see that we have a heavily biased towards, the plains and in the Midwest. So if you haven't been to the Weather Center in Norman and got to tour the building, this is what it looks like from the hallway outside of our operations center. We're basically surrounded by glass on 3 sides of our operations area. And if you were looking into that glass, this is what you would see. You can see our 5 desks there, the lead forecaster who has sole responsibility of issuing all of those convective watches, so the severe thunderstorm and tornado watches. The mesoscale forecaster, who is basically the wingman or wingwoman to the lead forecaster. We work very closely with them, determining those corridors of enhanced severe potential. We write those technical mesoscale discussions before a watch is issued. And so we work really closely together with the lead forecaster. The mesoscale assistant does kind of what the name implies. They assist the mesoscale forecaster. So if you think on like your biggest severe weather days, or if we have multiple severe weather areas outlooked, it can be tough to cover the entire country with just one person writing MDs. And so we'll typically sectorize those areas and work as a team to write those mesoscale discussions. And then our outlook forecaster is sitting there on the middle left. And on the day shift, they're issuing the day 2 outlook and the 20Z day 1 update. The outlook forecaster also works during the evening, and they will issue the initial day 1 outlook at 6Z. And we also have kind of a swing shift for our outlook forecasters. And I actually really like this shift because we get to do the day 2 out through day 8 outlooks. And it's a flexible shift. So we can come in anytime between 8 and 10 p.m. and leave between 4 and 6 p.m. or 6 a.m. Sorry. And so for those of us who are kind of naturally night owls, we all kind of covet this shift because it's not a true midnight where you have to stay until 8 a.m. But it fits our preferred scheduling pretty well. And it's a neat shift getting to kind of follow the progression of severe events. If you're lucky enough to put one in at like day 6 or 7, and then by the time you're done, you're issuing the initial day 2 outlook for that event. And so those shifts are really kind of cool. And then our fire weather forecaster. So SPC obviously does severe storms. We also do fire weather. And I like to say fire weather is severe weather. For the western half of the United States, they don't get a whole lot of severe thunderstorms, but they do get a lot of very dangerous and very large fire weather situations. And so, we like to say that fire weather is what happens behind the dry line. So a lot of it is similar ingredients to severe thunderstorms, but you're lacking moisture. You're looking at things like drought conditions and things like that. And so that part of our program is also really interesting. And our mesoscale assistant forecasters rotate back and forth between the meso A desk writing MDs and the fire weather desk. It's similar for our outlook and mesoscale forecasters. They rotate between those two desks. This is what one of our workstations looks like. So you can see we have a lot of monitors. We look at a ton of data. Anything that you can imagine, we have at our fingertips, whether it's observations, satellite, radar, objective analysis fields like you see on our mesoanalysis webpage. All of that is available on our system there. We also use a GR2 analyst machine to look at single site radar. We have a Leitman monitor. The monitor on the upper right hand side, kind of above Greg's head there, it's our kind of a situational awareness display. Anytime a WFO issues a severe or tornado warning, it pops up and kind of makes a noise and lets us know which office, issued what product. It also makes a noise and flashes whenever a WFO issues an LSR. And so that, helps keep us aware of what's going on. And then over on the far right, on the bottom there, you can see that's our AWIPS 2 station. Most of the WFOs use AWIPS 2 regularly. We don't use it at all. Just the amount of data that we look at that covers the entire country, AWIPS 2 crashes anytime we try to load the amount of data that we need to use. And so really, mainly all we use it for is the chat software that's attached to it that gives us direct access to collaborate and chat with all of the local WFOs. So SPC operations, we have 5 lead forecasters, 10 mesoscale outlook forecasters, 7 meso-As, and we are 24/7, 365. So that means rotating shift work. It means working on weekends, working on holidays. The weather doesn't sleep, right? So neither do we. So what's it really like to be a shift worker? Well, it's not always pleasant. So there are a lot of challenges that come with working rotating shifts. Our typical schedule at SPC looks like working 7 shifts in a row. So you might go from working 7 days to 7 evenings to 7 midnight shifts. You rotate through everything. We do have some flexibility to do preferred scheduling. So there's one forecaster, for instance, who only works evening shifts. And I hate working evening shifts because I have little kids, so I like to be home in the evening. And so he works all of my evening shifts and I take over his day in midnight shifts. And so we have the flexibility to kind of do that to meet people's preferences as much as we can. We have one lead forecaster who loves working midnights. So he only works, I mean, he works like 60% midnights and the rest of them are evening shifts. And then another lead works all day shifts. So we do have that flexibility, but for the most part, you're working at least seven, and I say at least because sometimes we do work more shifts than 7 in a row. But for base schedule, we work 7 shifts in a row, and then you usually get 2 or 3 or 4 days off, depending on your rotation. And again, you're working weekends, you're working holidays. It can be difficult going through all of that. It's hard on your body, it's hard on you mentally. It can strain relationships and lead to burnout because sometimes you feel like all you're doing is working, especially whenever it gets busy this time of year. However, there are some benefits to working shift work. So you're not stuck on a single set of shifts. If you happen to hate working day shifts, well, you're only working 7 of them, and then you get to switch again to something else. So you're not stuck. There's variety in when you're working, when you have time off. Like I mentioned before, we often have 3 or 4, sometimes more days off in a row. And so if you use your annual leave, it can be really easy to take like a whole week off of work and not have to use too much of your annual paid time off. We do have some weekdays off, which is nice whenever you have to do things like run errands and things like that. A lot of normal jobs, you don't get that time during the week to actually do stuff that it would be nice to do on a weekday. So that's always nice. For me, I like it because my kids are at school, so I have all day just me time. And so that's really nice. Um, we do get extra pay, so we get differential and holiday pay for working nights, working Sundays, working holidays. You get extra money for all of that. So that's another benefit. So it's not all bad. But what does it take to make that shift worker life actually work? Um, well, you have to prioritize your sleep. Sleep is of the utmost importance because it really impacts how you feel. And so listening to your body, having a really good support system in place of understanding friends and family partners who are going to, leave you to do your thing. Sometimes you're sleeping all day long and you need quiet and you need people who are going to understand that, you know, I might be cranky because I'm staying up all night working and that's not normal. Um, so it takes a lot of discipline to make sure that you're prioritizing your sleep and you get what your body needs. Aside from that physical part, it can be taxing on your mental wellness and not just the shift work part. But whether it's at SPC or at a WFO, oftentimes we're dealing with critical incidents. And so we have to deal with things like critical incident stress, which is basically trauma related to a critical incident, whether it's a mass casualty event from a tornado, or some other event. that we may be supporting. And so all of that can take a toll. And so it's really important to, make sure that you address your mental wellness. It's also important to make sure that, as you're dealing with all of this stress, you're taking time for self-care. So making sure that you enjoy and doing things that, may make you feel good. Make sure that you're talking to your family and friends so that they understand that, you know, these are really difficult jobs. They are stressful, not just because of the scheduling, but also because of, the types of events that you might be dealing with. It can be really difficult. And also just be kind to yourself. You can't juggle all of the balls all of the time, or you're going to drop some. And it's okay to say no. So just reminding yourself that, for instance, when I'm on midnights, I do not schedule anything. I do not commit to anything because I know I'm going to be tired and cranky. And so just, be kind to yourself. It's okay to take a step back and do nothing for a week if you need to. Okay, so all that sounds like kind of a downer. Like, why would anyone do that to themselves? And I mean, I make it sound bad because it is hard, it's stressful, but there are ways to cope and you find things that work for you to get through it. And so, is it worth it? And I would say absolutely 100% it is worth it. I absolutely love my job and what I do. And one example of why I think it is worth it is because what we do matters and it's really important. And here's an example of why. So these are damage pictures from the May 20th, 2013 Moore EF5 tornado. That picture of that building there, it was the hospital in Moore. And my doctor's office is located in that hospital. And on this event, I was working midnight shifts, and around 7 in the morning, I gave an interview to a local radio station about what we were expecting for that day, about how bad it could be, and around what time we expected storms to develop. Well, that morning, my doctor heard that interview. She said, "Hey, I know Liz. She's my patient, and I know she knows what she's talking about. She's the weather lady." And so she actually canceled all of her patients. She closed her office at 11 a.m. And so whenever the tornado hit, about 3.5 hours later, no one was there in her office. And there were cars actually thrown into her waiting area. And so luckily, she canceled those appointments. No one was there. No one, none of her patients were injured. None of the staff was there, had to experience that trauma. And, we don't often hear like personal stories like that very often and get that kind of feedback that, hey, I heard what you said and I listened and, it saved my life. And so whenever we do hear those stories, it kind of, reminds you of why you're doing this. And, it helps you realize that, what we do matters and people do listen and they do care about the information that we provide. So yes, it is worth it, even though it's hard and it's challenging and it's a strain. It's a very important job. Most of the time, it's very fun. These events in particular can be difficult to work because you're forecasting events where people, there's going to be injuries and possibly fatalities, and that's very sobering. And so it's a difficult job sometimes, but it's absolutely worth it. All right, so that's my spiel on shift work and all of that. So now I'm going to shift gears and I'm going to talk about some of the new things that are available at SPC, some of the things that we're working on currently that hopefully you may see in the coming couple of years. So we've had a new kind of paradigm that we've been implementing recently at SPC as related to our mesoscale discussions. And basically, we're trying to issue these more to be more targeted and issue them more frequently, because we're trying to fill that gap between once a watch is issued and when warnings are start being issued, because there's kind of a gap in information in that time frame. And so we're trying to be much more aggressive and targeted with our MDs. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a second. So this is an example of what we call a meso-beta scale MD. And it's usually a handful of counties. It is bigger than a warning, but smaller than one of our convective watches. And we're trying to highlight corridors where we see enhanced severe potential within those watch areas. And so this is an example of what one of those may look like. Here's another example of both severe and tornado. Again, you can see they're much smaller corridors within these larger watch areas. We can do things like highlights a storm that is ongoing and producing a strong or violent tornado, and we can talk about the downstream environment and how we expect that storm to evolve over the next couple of hours given those parameters. The top left there was a corridor of highlighting a corridor of intense damaging winds in a portion of a derecho that was ongoing across Wisconsin. And actually within that hatched area, we ended up having, I think, up to 120-mile-per-hour winds and a vast area of forest blowdown due to that derecho. And so we're just trying to be more targeted and more frequent in time with these MDs. So the big one that everyone is recently aware of is our new MD style graphics. These have kind of brought our graphics into the modern era. We can display real live data, such as satellite and radar. We can add the hodograph maps that everyone really likes. And, you know, these have been pretty well received. I think that, you know, they help highlight better some of the features and things like that that we're talking about in our discussions and make it more relatable with the data displayed in a much cleaner, sleeker, more modern way. And so these have been a real blessing to be able to issue graphics that actually look nice and clean and readable and modern. So we've been really excited about those. Recently, we posted our new lightning climatology. Climatologies for severe and wildfires in the same sort of format will also be coming in the next few months, so keep an eye on that. If you haven't looked at this page before, it's a really neat tool. There's lots of functionality within it. You can look at things like 1 hour, 4 hour, and daily climatologies. You can look at like the base probability maps that you see in the background there. You can get time series and heat maps, things like that. This is really cool. If you're into like photography or anything like that, this can be a really cool planning tool. But lots of neat information there. And like I said, the severe and wildfire part of this page will be coming in the next few months. This is something that's available currently, but it's only available internally to the NWS. So the WFOs can access it through an internal webpage that we have. And this is really neat. So we do continuous probabilities, which you can see there, the solid black lines highlight the probabilities that as we currently issue them, but you can see there's kind of a smoother gradient between the probabilities. And so we're testing out these more continuous probabilities rather than just the stair-stepped functions that we currently issue. And then by doing this, we can create these time series plots of, you know, the greatest categorical risk and then the individual hazards that you can see plotted there on the inset. And this is basically what we're doing is taking our 24-hour forecast and using a mask from the HRF for the timing guidance. And so it's kind of like a blend of human forecaster and, model guidance. And in these 4-hour chunks, you can point at any of these places on the map where we have probabilities and get these time series graphics. And these work out really nicely, and I'll show a couple of examples here. So here's one example from March 25th, 2021. We had several tornadoes during this event, but here is an example of how a WFO might use this guidance to issue like graphical information to, their partners on their weather story graphics on their web pages, things like that. And so you can give time of arrival information. We've been playing with using monochrome scales for our probabilities instead of like the green to pink colors that you tend to see, using a single color for a single variable. So, the hail, for instance, is various shades of green, and it gets darker as you get to higher probabilities, things like that. So for this day, if you click on different points and on the map, you can see what those different time series plots look like. And so this is really neat information to look at. It kind of gives you, okay, this is the time range, this 4-hour period of when, my highest probability for severe potential is going to occur. But does it work? Yes, it does. One example I'll use is our quad state supercell day, a couple years or a year and a half ago now, I guess. And you can see the plot of the supercell there along its way. What did this look like in our time series information? So you can see on the plot here, this is from Mayfield. You can see that the red moderate risk time was basically from about 8:30 p.m. until about 12:30 a.m. Is whenever our timing guidance highlighted the peak probabilistic threat. And you can see we had a tornado watch in effect for the Mayfield area starting at about 3 p.m. and it expired at 4 a.m. So when did the tornado actually occur? Well, the tornado occurred first touchdown just before 9 p.m. And then you can see in that little red bar within that pink rectangle, the Mayfield area was impacted by the tornado at 9:30 p.m. And so you can see when that tornado was occurring, it was right smack in the middle of when the timing for the highest probabilistic risk occurred. And so the timing guidance does work very well. So all of this is really cool, but what else can we do with it? So we're currently working with FEMA and other emergency manager partners to do things like impact forecasts. And so what does that mean? Well, some of the things that we can do that fall directly out of our probabilistic information is give different percentages, like a real world best case scenario, a real world worst case scenario, or as you can see, the 10, 50th, or 90th percentile scenario. And so we can give all kinds of exposure information, whether it's population, how many hospitals or schools or mobile homes might be impacted, how many tornadoes do we think are going to occur today? What's the real world best case scenario or worst case scenario for the number of tornadoes, things like that. And all of this falls directly out of our probabilities. Okay, well, everybody is familiar with our 10% SIG area or our hatched area, and that's that black hatched area that you see on our probabilities in our outlooks. So currently, our SIG areas are unconditional probabilities, which means if we have that area highlighted, we think that there's going to be 10% coverage of significant reports within those probabilistic areas. That means that we're limited in expressing what we feel like the intensity of an event is going to be. Right now, our probabilities are coverage probabilities in our outlooks. They kind of, incorporate intensity information via our categorical outlook, which comes directly from our probabilities. But it's kind of messy the way that coverage and intensity is married in our current outlook paradigm. So we are doing research in-house right now on what we call a double hatched area. And that's what you see on the far right-hand side of this plot here. And basically what we know is that as our probabilities increase towards moderate and high risk, the chance of SIGTORs, specifically EF3 and greater, increases exponentially. And so we also know that we have the skill to highlight areas where we think these higher end events are going to occur. And so that's what we're working on. And these new hatched areas will be conditional probabilities, which means it will allow us to draw those SIG areas outside of areas where we currently are allowed to. So for instance, for tornado probabilities right now, we can only draw a 10% SIG area if we have a 10% tornado probability. In this new paradigm where it's conditional, we'd be able to draw a 5% SIG area. And so that gives us the flexibility to say, we're not sure that we're going to have a lot of storms today. There may only be one or two tornadoes, but if those tornadoes occur, they could potentially be significant or even violent. And so this gives us greater flexibility in communicating not just the coverage, but also the intensity of these events. We're going into our second season in-house of testing this. We've been testing it in our hazardous weather test bed for a couple of years now. So hopefully, this is probably something that's still, I would say, 2 to 5 years away from happening, but it is being worked on. And I know there's often a lot of chatter within the weather community about having and being able to do this type of thing. So hopefully in the next few years that will become reality. All right, so tying this all together, what's the bigger picture? What else can we do with this information? So our impacts model really can give very useful information for planning purposes, pre-positioning of resources for emergency managers, for first responders, things like that. And this all falls out of our probabilistic outlooks. So we can run these impact models, 2-3 days in advance to help with pre-positioning of these resources, getting people ready, of what's to come. And so, we can let people know what's the potential scope of the impacts from this event. Is it going to be local, state, regional, national level event? What's the recurrence interval? How rare is this event? This specific example is from the Super Outbreak 2, April 27th, 2011. You can see the recurrence interval there is about 15 to 25 years. So, it's a generational type of an event. That's a big deal. We can give scores for exposure, for, how big of a population footprint is going to be within a potential violent tornado. And you can see here 50 to 100,000 people are under a risk of being impacted by a violent tornado. So really this, it gives a lot of information to, our emergency management partners. This can help WFOs and our media partners communicate to the public how rare this event that's forecast is expected to be. This is one that, you really need to pay attention to. And, if you hear those warnings, you really need to listen to, because it's not, our run of the mill severe event. And so being able to do this kind of thing out of our, falling right out from our outlooks, really highlights the importance of those forecasts and being, as accurate as possible and issuing those areas as soon as possible. And so, this is really exciting, and hopefully you'll see more of this over the coming years as well. And I think that was my last slide. So if you guys can unmute yourself and we can talk.
Cool. And I apologize for the echo. And like I said, I'm behind the computer right now, but I am going to start first with a couple of questions.
Sure.
A two-parter. I want to touch first on the quantitative, you said IDSS, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But more so of a clarification, is the plan going forward or over the course of the next couple of years to account for vulnerability when it comes down to deciding categorical outlook? Of course, ingredients-based forecasting is, half the battle, but I just want to make sure I understood that. Are you saying that other kind of 50% is going to be accounting for vulnerability in areas?
No. So our forecasts they don't take into consideration, we'll still be doing the forecast the same way that we do now. It's data driven, it's science driven, based on the environment, and how we expect an event to unfold. What we are able to do is, once we have those probabilistic forecasts, then we can use those masked over, social vulnerabilities and things like that, like mobile home exposure and things like that. And based on the forecast, this is our probabilities for potential impacts.
So more so who's impacted? Not
yes.
Got it. Okay. And then separate to that, and I appreciate you touching on sort of the mental health side of things. I think we could all probably agree that that's starting to become more of a discussion societally. And as students, and you were a student once upon a time, I'm sure you're familiar with burnout on the academia side. I'm sort of feeling that myself, and for those folks in upper level courses, I'm sure we are too. But relating to your shift work, not to really dive deep into too personal, but can you think of a time or a particular event, you touched on more, but an event in particular that sort of really was one to reflect on, and it took, some time to really kind of accept it, if that makes sense? And
yeah,
that event you have in mind, was there any conversations that took place between you and other forecasters on sort of grieving or talking that out? What was that process like?
So specifically, April 27th, 2011 was really hard. And the 2011 season in general was hard because, less than a month later, we had Joplin. And it was really difficult. But I remember after April 27th coming home that evening, and I just laid down in bed and cried. And, you're constantly getting these updates of fatalities and injuries and just, towns demolished, and it's very difficult to process, because you knew whenever you issued that forecast, that things were going to be bad, but at that point it's out of your control. You do the best that you can, and you hope that what you did helped someone, and I have no doubt that what we do helps a lot of people, but it's really hard whenever there are a lot of fatalities, to feel like, did I do enough? Was there something else that I could have said differently to, change the outcome? And so, we all think about this, and it's really frustrating because you can put out the best forecast in the world and you can communicate it in the best way possible, but bad things are still going to happen. And so you have to learn to, cope with that. And we do talk about it in operations, whenever we do have those events, just, going over, are there things that we could have done better? Is there not, what types of things can we do in the future to maybe reach just a few more people? Um, and then, just realizing like you're doing the best that you can, and human nature is what it is, and um, you can't control that outcome. You can only help people prepare for it. And so, yeah, we do have those discussions internally, and we vent and we talk about the things that are bugging us. And, you know, sometimes new things fall out. A lot of this information on like the IDSS and vulnerability and impacts, a lot of that fell out from the 2011 season. And it takes a lot of research and a lot of time to get to where we're at now and where we'll hopefully be with, you know, making this information more robust and more accessible to more people in the coming years. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, and I appreciate the responses to both questions. That being said, I'm going to open the floor to anybody else that has some questions for Liz Leitman.
Yeah, so obviously products that we get such as severe thunderstorm and tornado watches are disseminated directly to the public. I think the main argument right now is that some of these probabilistic and categorical forecasts are more so for the WFOs and guidance there. Is there a big push for these to be more public friendly so that the public better understands the categorical and probabilistic forecast that the SPC is producing?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So, our information is publicly available because we're the government and everything has to be publicly available because, you paid for it. Um, so with the caveat of that is just because some information is available publicly doesn't mean that that's the target audience. And you're right, a lot of our, especially our Outlook information, it's not intended for a public audience. It's intended for other meteorologists or emergency managers who are, weather savvy or broadcast mets. However, on our bigger days, we do issue our public weather outlook. And that is, we don't include the probabilities. It's just the categorical image. And it is plain language. So there's no technical speak, and that public weather outlook addresses the basic questions of what kind of weather, tornadoes, damaging winds, hail, where, when, and that's about it. So it's very concise, very simple information for a non-technical off or a non-technical user. That being said, we know that our information is very visible, and it can be a big challenge to communicate. And so we do rely on our WFOs and our media partners to help connect to, a broader public audience. We also have in-house research scientists who, are looking into things like the words that we use to communicate our outlooks. We all know that they are terrible, and everyone likes to argue over what order which word should be in. But that's why we use the color fill, and there are also numbers attached to that. We've been trying to use those numbers more often. So, in an outlook, you might notice something that says, there's an enhanced risk today, and then in parentheses it says level 3 out of 5. We use that in our social media posts more now. And so we are learning more about that and how to make our information more accessible, but it's a work in progress for sure.
Any other questions? Landon and Lexi.
Yeah, so as someone creating a categorical or probabilistic outlook, how do you weigh like conditionality versus the environment and coverage of storms? How does that play into your outlook?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our, like I said, our probabilities as they stand right now are coverage probabilities. So if I'm issuing a 15% tornado, then I'm saying, there's 15% of these grid boxes in this area are going to have a tornado in them. And a 15% tornado will also result in a moderate risk. And so, it's a balance of, because the probabilities directly drive the category. And so it's a balance of making sure that what you're thinking coverage wise fits with the meaning that's tied to those categories. And that can be quite challenging sometimes, especially whenever you do have those more conditional events. Like I was saying, perhaps we're not going to have a whole lot of storms, but the ones that we do have are going to be quite severe and potentially have major impacts. And so that's why we're trying to separate out more that coverage and intensity in this new outlook paradigm that we're testing, because we recognize that the way that we do it right now is kind of messy. And hopefully that will also help with some of those communication challenges in the future.
Okay, hi. So I have a question and I just want to preface it by you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. But as a woman in a STEM field, have you actually felt a bias because of your gender in how you've worked?
I would say yes, probably not as much as I have heard from others in meteorology, but especially outside of meteorology. There's definitely been, so for about 10 of my 14 years at SPC, I was the only female forecaster. During that time, I had 2 children, and there were definitely challenges with, I didn't have anyone at work who related really. I mean, sure, the guys had wives and they had kids, but I mean, I had nobody to talk to who related to being a pregnant woman working shift work in a highly stressful environment at times. And so that was definitely challenging. Sometimes I've kind of felt like, the odd woman out because, the guys will get together and plan things. And sometimes, would it be weird to include a woman in this thing that we're going to do? Or, would that be weird because she's a woman with a husband and we're guys hanging out or whatever? So, stuff like that does happen sometimes and it can be challenging. But I will say the people that I work with are amazing, and it's like having 21, or 20 now, because there's 2 females, there's 2 of us now, but it's like having 20 brothers and uncles, and they really are like my family. And I don't think any of the feelings that I might have had of being left out and things like that, I don't think it was ever anything intentional, but it still happened. And that can be challenging, to manage and to deal with. But the guys have always been really great. Like if I bring something up that's bugging me, or, any issues or anything, that they're always responsive and listen. And it's a really great environment. And the Weather Service on the whole, my entire experience has been really, really great. It's a wonderful organization to work for, and there's a lot of really good people. And the awesome thing is that even since I entered the NWS in 2006, we have had a substantial increase in female meteorologists. And there's more than ever currently. At SPC, it's still a challenge, I think, because we are very small. It's 22 of us covering the entire country. And generally, when people come to SPC, they stay for a really long time. So aside from our Meso A unit, most of us have been there for, 10 to 25 years. And so those openings don't come around very often. And so the opportunities to hire just are fewer compared to, 120 WFOs that, make up 2,500 employees compared to our 22. So it's the change in representing the broader demographics is slower to arrive at SPC in general. But, yes, there have been challenges, but for the most part, it's been a really good experience.
Any final questions, Kelly?
Yeah, so in regards to the
My bad, I jumped the gun. There you go. Go ahead.
in regard to the categorical and probabilistic forecasts, particularly on high impact days, what kind of hindcasting is being done by forecasters who make these outlooks to have sort of a human learning element and to become better forecasters at different regions or also just different types of events, and building new conceptual models for yourselves as forecasters?
Let me see. I actually had a slide in here and I hid it for some reason, but so we actually do, let me see. Am I still sharing my screen? Yes. Okay. Okay. Can you see this slide?
Yes.
Okay, so we have several types of verification at SPC. We have some that is real-time subjective, that, you know, kind of plots lightning display along with reports. So we can kind of subjectively look at it and see how, you know, the event went. We also do more probabilistic type of verification, and where we can look at things like reliability diagrams. We can see how our individual probabilistic areas verified, things like that. So for instance, on this particular one, you can see like the 2% tornado area verified at 0.8%, the 5% verified at 3.9%, things like that. So we do go back and we look at these things. We do have some other types of in-house verification schemes and things like that that I didn't include here. But yes, we have a lot of things that we can go back and look at for each event to see how we're doing. We also look at annual statistics to make sure that our probabilities are properly calibrated, that we as the forecasters individually are properly calibrated. Things like that. So yes, we look at a lot of verification information. And if things didn't go well, you can bet that we are our own worst critics, even when things do go well. So like the double high risk on March 31st, you know, we're looking at it with a fine tooth comb and nitpicking, saying like, oh man, we really screwed up here. You know, how could we have done better in this little area and things like that. So yes, we do have a lot of this type of information. We also have, you know, practically perfect information that we look at, all kinds of things. So that does occur. We don't just move on and forget about it.
Well, that said, let's thank Liz Leitman for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
And don't forget, we do have, like I said, our elections next week. I hope to see all of you guys there. And you all have a great night. Take care. Thanks again, Liz. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great night. Take care.
All right. Take care.